The world below me was a familiar, comforting tapestry of green and gray the deep. Emerald green of the pine forests, the hard, ancient gray of the granite peaks. I was in a state police helicopter, heading home after a month-long trade mission. Overseas, we were flying over the pristine wilderness of the northern mountains, and I had asked the pilot to make a small detour. I wanted to see my house, my sanctuary, the beautiful modern mountain home I had built for myself long before I ever thought about a life in politics. We crested the final ridge, the one that opened up into the secluded valley that held my property. I leaned forward, a smile on my face, ready for that first soul-soothing glimpse of the home I missed so dearly. But the house was gone. I stared, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. Where my beautiful home of glass and cedar and stone should have been, there was just scar, a gaping, ugly wound of splintered wood, shattered glass, and twisted metal, surrounded by the raw, churned-up earth of bulldozer tracks. A pile of rubble. It was gone. All of it. A strange, cold calm washed over me, a terrifying, absolute clarity that pushed aside the shock and the grief. It was the same feeling I had only ever felt a few times in my life, in moments of extreme, life-altering crisis. I knew with a certainty that was as solid as the mountains around me exactly who had done this. I keyed the intercom to the cockpit. "Get me a secure line to Colonel Davies at State Police Headquarters," said, my voice a low, flat, and dangerously quiet thing. The call connected instantly. "Colonel," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion, "I have a situation. Need you to scramble every available detective from the Major Crimes Unit and the Public Corruption Unit. I need them at my private residence in Pinnacle Ridge. Now seal the entire area. No one in or out." And then I took a deep breath, the cold fury beginning to build. "Get me the Attorney General on the line. Immediately." That's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? Subscribe to HOA Files. To understand that moment, that insane, unbelievable act of destruction, you have to understand the life I had before, and the woman who could not and would not accept it. My name is Alex Thompson. I am the governor of this state. But before I was a governor, I was a man who built things. I had a successful career as an entrepreneur. I built a tech company from the ground up. I made my fortune, and I decided to build my dream. Not a company, but a home. I bought 1,000 acres of pristine, untouched mountain land, a place of profound beauty and solitude. And on the most perfect plateau, with a view that stretched for 100 miles, I built my house. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, a beautiful, private retreat that I had designed myself. It was my sanctuary, my escape from the pressures of the world. And then, ironically, I entered the world in a bigger way than I had ever imagined. I was angry about the direction our state was heading, and on a whim, I ran for governor. I ran on a reform platform, a promise to fight for the little guy, to respect our state's heritage, and to break the grip of the corrupt good-all-boy network. And, to the shock of the entire political establishment, I won. My new life was a whirlwind of responsibility, of constant public scrutiny. My beautiful private mountain home became even more important. It was the one place I could go where I wasn't the governor. I was just Alex, but the world had begun to encroach on my sanctuary. A massive, ultra-exclusive, gated community called Pinnacle Ridge had been built in the valley below my property. It was a place of ostentatious wealth and rigid, suffocating rules. And its undisputed queen, the president of its powerful HOA, was a woman named Brenda. Brenda was not just an HOA Karen. She was a political operative. Her husband was a major real estate developer, one of the very men whose corrupt backroom deals I had run against. She had been a major fundraiser, and a vocal, vicious supporter of my political opponent. To her, I was not just a neighbor, I was the enemy. And my beautiful, private, and stubbornly independent property, which was an in-holding and not part of her HOA, was a personal affront, a symbol of everything she hated about my politics and my presence. The war began the day I took office. She couldn't attack me politically, not directly. so she attacked my home. The harassment started with the usual petty HOA nonsense, amplified by a current of pure political malice. I received a formal notice of violation from the Pinnacle Ridge HOA. I was being fined for the color of my own private 9 HOA gate, a gate that was a mile away from her actual community. I was being fined for the unapproved commercial vehicles parked on my property, the black, unmarked SUVs of my state police security detail. My inner monologue was a raging storm of disbelief. I am the governor of the state. I'm dealing with $1 billion state budget, a teacher's strike, and a drought in the eastern counties. And this woman, this petty tyrant, is sending me letters about my mailbox? The absurdity of it was infuriating, but I was determined to handle this as a private citizen. I did not want to be accused of using the power of my office to settle a personal grudge. That was her game, not mine. I had my personal lawyer send her a polite but legally ironclad letter explaining that my property was not in her jurisdiction. Her response was to escalate. She began a campaign of lawfare, using her significant political connections at the county level to tie me up in a web of bureaucratic red tape. She filed a frivolous complaint with the county zoning commission, claiming my house violated a non-existent ridgeline ordinance. That triggered a full formal review, which of course I won, but it cost me thousands in legal fees and weeks of headaches. She filed a complaint with the county environmental department, claiming the construction of my house had damaged a sensitive watershed. That triggered another, even more invasive investigation, which, again, I won. She was using the system, the very government I was now in charge of, as a weapon of personal political harassment. It was a brilliant and deeply infuriating strategy. And then, the threats became more direct. The HOA's lawyers, a firm that was also on a massive retainer, with her husband's development company, sent my personal lawyer a new, more aggressive letter. They were no longer just complaining about my gate. They were now claiming that my entire 1,000-acre property was a public nuisance and a fire hazard. They were threatening to petition a local court to have a conservator appointed to manage my land for the safety of the surrounding community. It was a completely insane, legally baseless threat, but it was a clear signal of her intent. She didn't just want me to follow her rules. She wanted to take my land, and then came the perfect storm. A moment of crisis that she saw as her golden opportunity. I had to lead a month-long overseas trade mission, a crucial part of my economic agenda for the state. My house would be empty, guarded only by a small, rotating detail of state troopers. While I was on the other side of the world, negotiating multi-billion-dollar deals for our state, a dry lightning storm rolled through the mountains. A single bolt struck an old, dead tree on a remote, inaccessible corner of my vast property, miles from any structure. A small, 1-acre brush fire started, was quickly contained by the Forest Service, and was never a threat to any home's mine, or theirs. But Brenda saw her chance. She held an emergency, middle-of-the-night meeting of her HOA board. She used the small, contained brush fire as her pretext. She declared in a series of frantic, panicked emails to the residents that my property was an imminent and catastrophic threat to the entire community. She framed my absence during this crisis not as me doing my job, but as an act of gross criminal negligence. And then she made her final, fatal, and unforgivable move. She and her lawyers, using their deep connections in the local county court system, found a corrupt, friendly judge, a man who was a close political ally of her husband. Taking advantage of my legal inability to respond from overseas, they filed for, and were granted, a fraudulent ex parte emergency order, an order based on a mountain of lies and perjured testimony. The order did not just grant them the right to inspect my property. It did not just grant them the right to clear some brush. It granted the Pinnacle Ridge HOA the power to take any and all necessary action to permanently abate the ongoing, catastrophic public nuisance of my property. And Brenda's definition of nuisance was my entire house while I was on a plane, flying home from a successful trade mission, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. Brenda and the HOA were hiring a demolition crew. They went to my property. They presented the phony, but official-looking court order to the small detail of state troopers who were guarding the empty residence. The troopers, faced with a seemingly legitimate order from a sitting judge, were legally obligated to stand down, and as I was in the air, somewhere over the Atlantic, they took a wrecking ball and a fleet of bulldozers, and they demolished my home. They reduced my beautiful multi-million-dollar mountain sanctuary, my private retreat, the home I had poured my heart and soul into building, to a pile of splintered wood and broken glass. And that brings us back to that moment in the helicopter. The moment of pure, unadulterated shock. The moment of cold, quiet, and absolute rage. The moment I made the call, what followed was not a simple arrest. It was a full-scale, top-level, state-led investigation. The kind of investigation that is usually reserved for organized crime syndicates or deeply entrenched political corruption, which, as it turned out, was exactly what this was. My state police, the finest law enforcement agency in the country, descended on the quiet, exclusive community of Pinnacle Ridge like a righteous storm. They sealed the entire development. They seized the HOA's records, their computers, their servers. They executed search warrants on Brenda's home, on her husband's development company, and, most satisfyingly, on the chambers of the corrupt county judge who had signed the fraudulent order. The investigation, led by my hand-picked and very angry Attorney General, quickly uncovered a massive, sprawling criminal conspiracy. This wasn't just about their hatred for me, it was about greed. Brenda and her developer husband had been using the HOA as a criminal enterprise to systematically harass and devalue the properties of non-compliant residents, the goal of forcing them to sell their land to her husband's company at a steep discount. My property, the largest and most valuable of them all, was to be their crown jewel. The fraudulent fines, the fake complaints, the phony court order, and the ultimate demolition of my home were all just the final brutal acts in a long-running racketeering scheme. The Attorney General held a massive televised press conference. A week later, I stood beside him, my face a mask of grim resolve. He laid out the entire sordid conspiracy for the world to see. He announced the arrest of Brenda, her husband, the entire 5-member HOA board, the HOA's lawyers, and the corrupt county judge. They were not just facing charges of felony destruction of property, they were facing a massive 27-count indictment. Under the state's RICO Act, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, they were being charged as a criminal mob. The fallout was a political and legal earthquake. The Pinnacle Ridge HOA was dissolved by order of the state. The entire community was placed into a state-supervised receivership. The residents whose dues had been used to fund a criminal enterprise that had ultimately attacked the state's own governor were facing financial ruin. Brenda and her co-conspirators were facing decades in state prison. I began the long, slow, and painful process of rebuilding my home, but this time it would be more than a home. The story of what happened, of the audacious attack on a sitting governor, had turned my private sanctuary into a public symbol, a testament to the fight against corruption and the abuse of power. This whole brutal, ugly, and ultimately triumphant war taught me a profound lesson about the nature of power. Brenda thought she was a powerful HOA president, a queen in her own small pond. She had no idea that her petty, vindictive actions were not just a dispute with a neighbor. They were a direct attack on the institutions of the state itself. She tried to demolish a man's house, a man she saw as her political and personal enemy, never ever imagining that that man was the living embodiment of the very laws she was so arrogantly and foolishly breaking. She brought a wrecking ball too, a political fight, and in the end, the only thing she managed to demolish was her own life. Brenda and the judge are both headed to state prison for a very, very long time. But a radical, anti-government, sovereign citizen group, heavily funded by my political rivals and their dark money networks, has now filed a federal lawsuit against me, claiming I used the awesome power of my office to orchestrate a politically motivated prosecution of a brave citizen activist. They are demanding the release of all my personal and official communications, and they are calling for my impeachment.